Dr. Kengor is the director of the Grove City. By the way, we love Grove City College, and Phyllis, we talk a lot about it. We love so many of their students have been a part of this, and so many great things they do. It's a great college, and Dr. Kengor is the director of Grove City Center for Vision and Values. If you look up what they're doing, it's great. It's a great center, and Paul's the leader there. There's a lot of different folks attributed. He's a New York Times bestseller. The newest book, though, it's also right on the heels, as new as new can be, is called Takedown. And I will tell you, Phyllis Schlafly does a weekly radio program. I think she's only done that for 27 years. She's just getting started. But she does a weekly show, and when Paul came on and talked about Takedown, it's a book that talks about how the progressives and the communists really had a plan to destroy the family and marriage. Phyllis, when she finished that show, and she has all the big timers on the show, she came in Monday morning and she said, we need to buy more of those books, Takedown, and send them around to folks, because he was great on the radio, and it's a really important book. I'll tell you, Paul, that she said for a lot of years she talked about what you were saying and never described it as explicitly, the connection to what had happened, and she was really pleased that you have done this, and it's a great book. So thank you, Paul, for being here. Paul Kengor, the author of Takedown.
Thank you. And the reason I did that book was because I realized in the course of, for years I've spoken on communism, the Cold War, and I actually, when I lecture on communism, we actually read the Communist Manifesto. So I don't know how many students have told me over the years. I get invited to campuses to give this talk called "Why Communism Is Bad," because you guys aren't getting it from the typical college that most students are going to, right? And the one thing I hear all the time from those students is, well, the Communist Manifesto really isn't that bad. I mean, it's a pretty good book. It talks about spreading the wealth and wealth redistribution, and I know right away they haven't read it. But we actually read it, and aside from phrases like, the entire philosophy of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property. Right then and there, my 3-year-old daughter Gianna could tell you, Daddy, they're going to have to kill people to do that. Right? And then we come across other phrases, including the one where Marx writes about the abolition of the family, with an exclamation mark. And it's an 1848 book, Abolition of the Family, and it says, an infamous proposal of the communists. So by then, already, 1848, it's already an infamous proposal of the communists. Everyone knows the communists are about abolishing the family. And then, of course, the students say, well, what does that mean? And then we talk about what exactly that means, and then I talk about Marx and Engels and what they thought about the family. Marx wrote a letter to Engels. He wrote, blessed is he who has no family. How's that for a take on the Beatitudes? To which Engels could totally relate, because Engels didn't want a family. And Engels had mistress after mistress, many of which wanted him to marry them, and he wouldn't do it. Marx had a bunch of kids, 2, 3, 4 of them. I go through the numbers and the exact details in the book. Preceded him in death. At least 2 committed suicide, 2 daughters. One of the daughters committed suicide in a suicide pact with her husband, who Marx's son-in-law, who Marx didn't like because he was part Cuban, and Marx was a flaming racist. And Marx had an affair with a family nursemaid, and she got pregnant. Marx refused to ever acknowledge the child's existence. Marx and Engels both didn't believe in monogamy. They were the first kind of smashing monogamy crowd that the 1960s New Left picked up and ran with. So we go through all of this stuff, and I realized at some point in this whole marriage debate that nobody had put together in one book, in just a few pages, not a whole bunch of pages, this history by the left going back 200 years, from radical socialist utopians to communists to secular progressives to cultural Marxists, to take down, redefine, and reshape family and marriage. So, you guys today, when you look at the same-sex marriage debate, which is in essence about redefining marriage, right? That's really what it's about. Because marriage has always meant, literally, a male-female bond. A tree is a tree, dog is a dog, cat is a cat, podium is a podium, a wall is a wall, marriage is a man and a woman. So this idea of redefining marriage, and especially going against the idea that there's a single set, fixed, natural law-based, biblical law-based idea of male-female marriage, that has been steadily attacked since the 1800s. It's been going on for a long, long time. And the typical same-sex marriage supporter has absolutely no idea, no knowledge whatsoever of that ideological history. They don't know any of it. The typical same-sex marriage supporter supports same-sex marriage for reasons that they believe are totally benevolent, for reasons of what they call marriage rights, marriage equality. But they have no idea that there are other people on the other side, very extreme side, who have very sinister motives with this. And for them, the modern same-sex marriage supporter is a gift from, I won't say the heavens, because Marx and all these guys were atheists, but is just a tremendous gift that they never thought that they would ever get. So that's what my book goes through. I'm just going to hit, I got 20 minutes, correct? Yep. So I had this beautiful, fancy PowerPoint presentation all set up, but it doesn't go well here, so I'm going to just read a few quotes from some notes. But Karl Marx, Communist Manifesto, 1848, quote, "Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists." So again, that was 1848. But if you go even before then, there were in America marriage redefiners, family redefiners, radical socialist utopians. Charles Fourier, who never actually made it here, but Albert Brisbane applied his ideas in the United States. John Humphrey Noyes, Robert Owen, they were setting up these ideological colonies all throughout the United States in the 1800s. John Humphrey Noyes was in New England first. Puritans considered him such a menace with his ideas of collective marriage, group marriages, very young people being forced to have sex with and marry very much older people, group marriages. The Puritans kicked him out of there. Eventually, he ends up settling in Oneida, New York, where they create the Oneida Colony. There were 40 to 50 of these colonies that were created in the United States in the 1800s. And none of them lasted more than about 4 or 5 years. So these attempts by the left, it's always on the left. All right, these attempts by the left to redefine and reshape family and marriage, they always, it doesn't matter if it fails. They just think that whoever did it previously didn't do it quite right. But we'll get it right this time. We'll get it right this time. One of them was a man named Robert Owen. And Robert Owen started the New Harmony Colony in New Harmony, Indiana. Anyone ever hear of this guy? Good, good. Way better than a typical, that's good. 4 or 5 people. Usually it's nobody at all. But Robert Owen, on July 4th, 1826, what was that? 50th anniversary of America's Declaration of Independence, the Jubilee, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, literally breathing their final breaths. It's this great time, great book by Andrew Burstein on this called America's Jubilee. Great time for America, but we still, even back then, had guys like this. He stands up July 4th, 1826, gives his Declaration of Mental Independence. And he said, quote, I now declare to you and to the world that man up to this hour has been in all parts of the earth, a slave to a trinity of the most monstrous evils that could be combined to inflict mental and physical evil upon the whole race. Well, what's that? I refer to private property, absurd and irrational systems of religion and marriage, founded upon individual property, combined with some of these irrational systems of religion. So Robert Owen's unholy trinity, monstrous evils, private property, religion, and marriage. Private property, religion, and marriage. That was 22 years before the Communist Manifesto even came out. Marx and Engels, quote, it is not possible to speak of the family Again, they reject the idea that there's a single set natural biblical design for family and marriage. Bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives held in common. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime, we, the communists, plead guilty. But, you will say, we destroy the most hallowed of all relations when we replace home education by social. If you read the Communist Manifesto, there's a 10-point plan in the Communist Manifesto. Point 1 is abolition of private property. By the way, points 2 and 3 are implementation of a graduated progressive income tax that was 65 years before America, before we got ours. And a lot of these ideas, the progressive left is just a few decades or half century or so behind the far left. Just takes them a little longer to get there. They also they called for the third point, second and third point, abolition of all right of inheritance. So you simply couldn't inherit whatever your parents wanted to. And one of the reasons that Marx and Engels didn't like that was that carried on the family from generation through generation. Inheritance did. But the 10th and final point is, quote, free education for all children in public schools, unquote. They didn't want church-based education. They didn't want home education. They wanted all education to be done in public schools. And of course, where are my libertarians to smack this around, right? It would be free, right? Because as we all know, public education is free. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. There's just a big money tree that grows outside of the schools. All around the outside, you just pull the money off of it. And that's what you pay for the education. It's free. It doesn't cost anybody anything at all. They also, of course, hated religion. Marx said religion is the what? Opiate of the masses. He also said communism begins where atheism begins. I got a kick out of the Latin American guy that tried to give Pope Francis a communist crucifix. That is an oxymoron if there ever was one. Francis is like, what is this? Right? But a communist crucifix, I only wish that Marx and Engels or Lenin could have been in that room to say, that is the most absurd damn thing I've ever seen, right? Comrade, communism begins where atheism begins. What are you doing? Lenin, all worship of a divinity is a necrophilia. There is nothing more abominable than religion. Nothing more abominable than religion. Friedrich Engels, with the transfer of the means of production into common ownership, which is what we want to do, the single family ceases to be the economic unit of society. Private housekeeping is transformed into a social industry. They wanted all women out of the homes, into the factories, into the coal mines, into the fields, and they wanted home care, daycare, home cleaning, all work around the home to be a nationalized function of the government. The care and education of the children become a public affair. Society looks after all children alike, whether they are legitimate or not. And that's exactly what Engels and Marx both wanted, especially Marx, because Marx refused to ever earn any income. Marx's mother said, I wish Karl would quit writing about capital and start earning some. And Marx's wife was very angry with him because the guy just refused to get a job. Aristotle said that revolutions are started by men for reasons of private motive. And Marx, the kind of communist state that he was creating, is exactly what he wanted for his own life. A government that would take care of the kids. Alexandra Callante, one of the leading Marxist feminists of the Bolshevik Revolution. Any of you ever read Alexandra Callante? No? No, you should. I mean, we learn about Rosa Parks and Eleanor Roosevelt and, great women in American history. You need to know about some of these characters as well, because their ideas are around today. I'll read her quote, and then I'll compare it to somebody who says almost exactly the same thing right now. 1920s. The worker mother must learn not to differentiate between your child and mine. The worker mother must remember that there are only our children, the children of Russia's communist workers. Communist society will take it upon itself all the duties involved in the education of the child. Now, she wrote that in the 1920s. Now here is Melissa Harris Perry. She has a PhD, Princeton, Wake Forest, Duke. She's on MSNBC. She's part of the Lean Forward campaign. She's one of the big progressive stars in the liberal movement. And she says this: "We have never invested as much in public education as we should because we've always had this kind of private notion of children. We haven't had a very collective notion of children. We have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities, When I read that, I had to grab that quote for the book, and I found one of the sources, the Fox News website, and I was reading the readers' comments, and people were saying, "I can't believe this! I've never heard anything like this before in my life." So I have. Alexandra Callante and the Bolsheviks were saying it 100 years ago. So we're just a few decades behind them. That's all. Divorce in Russia, abortion in Bolshevik Russia, the communists, as part of their war on the family and marriage, one of the only things that they made free for people, while they were banning religion, speech, assembly, bank accounts, everything else, the easiest thing you could do was get a divorce or get an abortion. I mean, if you're a woman, you didn't have the right to own a fur coat or a bank account or go to church, but man, baby, you want an abortion? The sky was the limit. Go get one. You want a divorce? Just fill out this card. There will be no bureaucratic obstacles in your way whatsoever. Within 10, 15 years, Russia had divorce rates unseen in the history of the world. People getting divorced 10, 15, 20 times. Unbelievable. I cite all this data. None of it is exaggerated, believe me. Abortion was so out of control in Bolshevik Russia that in 1936, Stalin had to ban it. Khrushchev brought it back in 1955. Stalin was reprimanded by Trotsky. "Comrade, you can't be a good communist and ban abortion. You have to have abortion." By the 1970s in the Soviet Union, they were averaging 7 to 8 million abortions per year. America's worst numbers post-Roe were about 1 to 1.5 million. Russia, by the 1930s, women were having 3 abortions for every live birth. Now, one person who went over there to check this out, I have a chapter on her in the book, is Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood. Margaret Sanger founded the ABCL, American Birth Control League, and she wanted birth control because, 1, she wanted women to be able to space their births. 2, she was a racial eugenicist who preached a gospel of race improvement. And she was involved with a Negro Project. Check out Alveda King's website on this. And I quote in the book, too, her 1926 speech to the Silver Lake, New Jersey chapter of the Women's KKK. It's on pages 366 to 367 of her memoirs. It's right there. If you're a progressive, do your best to never, ever look at those pages, right? I mean, don't look at that stuff. Planned Parenthood gives out a Margaret Sanger Award every year. Hillary Clinton received it a few years ago, and she said, "I am in awe of Margaret Sanger. Thank you for this." No editorials in the New York Times, "Oh, you know, Mrs. Clinton, that's an organization founded by a woman who spoke to the KKK. Repudiate that, apologize, turn back." No. She is an icon in the progressive movement. If there was a conservative or conservative group that had a founder that spoke to the KKK, done. The group would cease to exist. So Sanger went to Russia in 1934. And she was very impressed. She said, "The mother and the child are under the protection and care of the government to an extent perhaps never before equaled in history." And she was appalled by the number of abortions they were having. She said, yikes, this is really bad. I didn't think it would ever get this bad. She said, in Moscow alone, there's roughly 100,000 abortions per year. But get this is progressivism in a nutshell here. It's okay, right? All the officials, though, with whom I discussed the matter, stated that as soon as the economic and social plans of Soviet Russia are realized, neither abortions or contraception will be necessary or desired. A functioning communist society will assure the happiness of every child and will assume the full responsibility for its welfare and education. There you see the progressives' faith in the collective state. If you can just give the state enough power, if those Republicans would just fund this stuff, right, everything will work out okay. And she loved what they were doing on birth control. Get this, quote, this is 1935. She's writing this in her birth control review. Fast forward to 2015. This sounds like liberals today. I challenge you to tell me that it doesn't. Theoretically, there are no obstacles to birth control in Russia. It's accepted on the grounds of health and human right. We could well take example from Russia here in America. Again, we just had to wait about 80 years for progressives to take the example from, where there are no legal restrictions, no religious condemnation, and where birth control instruction is part of the regular welfare service of the government. And that's where we are in America today, where birth control is part of the regular welfare service of the government. And if you're Hobby Lobby or Conestoga Woods or the Little Sisters of the Poor, who are celibate nuns who take a vow of poverty, and you don't want to have to be forced to pay for birth control, especially because it violates the teachings of your faith, we progressives say, we will see you in court. And if you think that you shouldn't be funding abortifacients, right, birth control drugs that cause an abortion, you favor a war on women. And Hillary Clinton will compare you at Hobby Lobby to misogynistic regimes in the Middle East. Read her speech in Aspen, Colorado, where she did that last year. I got about 5 minutes. I got to move forward a little quicker. All of this gets really wild with the cultural Marxists of the Frankfurt School, which no one knows anything about, and you should. Because the cultural Marxists and their ideas, those are the ones that have really seeped their way into education in America and that we're really seeing the results of today. America is not going to be an economically class-based Marxist communist model. It's not going to happen. Why? Because the cultural Marxists in the 1920s understood that anytime that you put a capitalist free market system, anytime you give people a choice, they're not going to choose to economically enslave themselves with communism. So in the 1920s, a group of Marxists got together, Marx Engels Institute, 1920 and 1922. George Lukács, one of the founders, the Hungarian cultural commissar, and they said the key to taking down the West, to rebuilding it, right, to starting all over again, is through culture, education, and sex, marriage and family, media, Hollywood, higher education. This is where we can really change things. Lukács said, "Woman is the enemy. Healthy love dies in marriage, which is a business transaction. The bourgeois family gives off swamp vapors. It stinks. Politics is only the means, culture is the goal." So what they did was they combined their version of Marxism with Freudianism. The cultural Marxists were Freudian Marxists. Now this is unbelievable, because you're taking the worst ideas of the 19th century, Marxism, and the worst idea of the 20th century, Freud, and these guys are saying, oh, let's put these together, right? We could really do a bang-up job with this. And so they started, these were psychologists. They brought psychology to Marxism. They started this Frankfurt School. Wilhelm Reich, I've got a chapter on him in the book, and if you buy my book, don't let your parents see that you're reading the chapter on Wilhelm Reich. It should have an R rating over top of it. Marriage falls to pieces as the result of the ever-deepening discrepancy between sexual needs and economic conditions. He's writing about marriage. The sexual needs can be gratified with one and the same partner for a limited time only. On the other hand, the economic tie, the moralistic demand, and the human habit foster the permanency of the relationship. This results in the wretchedness of marriage. These guys said monogamous marriage is impossible, shouldn't be happening. Reich talks about trying to have sex with a family nanny when he was 4 years old. 4. You know, girls, I know you don't totally understand guys, but any of us will tell you we didn't have that kind of urge at the age of 4. I mean, that's just crazy. He was watching the farm animals, all kinds of other stuff, and I could go on and on. It'd be too sexually explicit.
I'm uncomfortable.
Okay, good. I'll move on. The other one, the big one, and I got a couple minutes, Herbert Marcuse. The Frankfurt School ends up coming to Columbia University through Columbia Teachers College and Professor John Dewey, who is the honorary president for life of the National Education Association. They didn't get kicked out. They had to flee Germany because Hitler took over. And a lot of the men in the Frankfurt School were Jewish, so they had to leave. Hitler would have killed them. So they end up, of all places, being welcomed at Columbia Teachers College. And John Dewey said, they can do this wonderful work in my teachers' college for the NEA, National Education Association. Marcuse becomes extremely influential on the 1960s New Left. And these guys argue, these cultural Marxists argue, that human beings are fully capable and really it's kind of natural of bisexuality, of easily having sex with both genders. Sex and gender are much more fluid. They reject the idea of a natural, traditional, biblical family, marriage, sexuality. And they had an enormous effect on the 1960s New Left. The Weather Underground, Mark Rudd, Kate Millett, who wrote Sexual Politics, Betty Friedan, who wrote the Feminine Mystique, Bill Ayers, Bernardine Dohrn. They preached the idea of smashing monogamy. Bill Ayers, Mark Rudd talks about part of the code in the Weather Underground. The women in there said you don't need men for sex. And the men in there said that they needed to try to have sex with their buddies, their best friends, because they needed to smash down these bourgeois concepts about sexuality and marriage and everything else. Rudd said he tried but just couldn't quite pull it off, which he blamed on cultural taboos and inhibitions. Maybe you just weren't turned on by this, Mark, right? Bill Ayers, who talks about this in the September 11, 2001 edition of the New York Times. It's the article by Denisha Smith, No Regrets for Love of Explosives. September 11, 2001 New York Times. You should read it, it's chilling. But he talked in there about how he was able to pull it off and was able to have sexual intercourse with his best friend. And so he was able to do that for a while. But these groups, so you see here the left, and these guys were Marxists. They were communists. So you see the kind of development here over time. It gets increasingly more radical and increasingly more radical. All right, I got 1 minute. Here's what really compelled me to do this. I noticed a few years ago, when I get up in the morning, I read about 10 different websites, which you guys probably do too. Unfortunately, as an occupational hazard, I have to read People's World, which is the Communist Party USA publication. It's the successor to the Daily Worker. I have to read the website of Communist Party USA, cpusa.org. And I noticed a few years ago, they are absolutely on fire for gay marriage. They are rabid supporters of the entire LGBT agenda. The month that just passed, the People's World every day marked LGBT Pride Month. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was 10, if not 100 times more common for you to see the rainbow flag on the People's World website than the red flag with a hammer and sickle, because they don't like to show people that they're communists. They call themselves progressives. So, but they are wild about this. And the thing that really threw me off is when I saw that Castro's Cuba has really embraced this issue. And Castro's niece, Mariela Castro, who is like the leading sex official expert in the country, they're having gay pride events in broad daylight in Havana. 20 years ago, that absolutely got you thrown in jail. Castro would send you off to a nut house if he thought you were. He thought homosexuality was a mental illness. And so why suddenly is Cuba embracing this? Are they suddenly becoming liberal, or what is this? Well, one of the first things Castro did, he opened up abortion, he opened up divorce. The numbers on abortion and divorce in Cuba are unspeakably outrageous. They're so bad no one even knows what they are. It's like everybody in Cuba is divorced. When Elian Gonzalez happened like 20 years ago, it was perfectly appropriate that he was from a divorced family. Of course. Almost everybody there is divorced. I think for the far left, for the communist left, Communist Party USA, People's World, Fidel Castro, and these other groups, they're embracing same-sex marriage because this gives them not a chance to further marriage rights and marriage equality and all that sort of stuff. For them, this fuels and fits this longer-term agenda of abolishing the family and taking down natural, traditional, and biblical family that Marcuse wrote about, that Wilhelm Reich wrote about, that Marx and Engels and the others wrote about. So that's the longer, deeper ideological history I talk about in the book. I want to take your questions. Yeah. And again, in no way does this mean, please, 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 that the typical same-sex marriage supporter is a communist. Of course it doesn't. I mean, of course it doesn't. But what's fascinating for the communists is this gives them the tool they've been looking for to finally take down the natural, traditional, and biblical family. And even more magnificent for them, this allows them to do what they've always wanted to do the most, which is attack religion. So for them, they love this issue. They love it.